The richest woman in Chicago was dying, and her money was completely useless. No amount of wealth could save her in that moment. But you know who could. The man everyone had just insulted. The single father working 2 jobs just to survive. The one person in that expensive restaurant who understood what really mattered. This story will flip everything you believe about success upside down. Watch till the end. This hits hard. Welcome to the Fortune Files channel. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and share your thoughts on the story, as well as where you are watching from. Let me tell you a story that will remind you what really matters in life. Picture this. The Golden Peacock restaurant in downtown Chicago. Crystal chandeliers hanging from every ceiling, soft piano music floating through the air, and tables set with silverware that costs more than most people's monthly rent. This wasn't just any restaurant. This was where the wealthy came to see and be seen. On this particular evening, a woman named Elizabeth Hart walked through those gleaming doors. At 32 years old, Elizabeth was one of the most powerful CEOs in the entire city. Her diamond earrings caught the light with every step. Her designer suit fit perfectly. Everything about her screamed success, power, and control. But if you looked closely at her face, you'd see something else. Coldness. Distance. A wall built so high that nothing could get through. Beside her walked her 6-year-old son, Daniel. The boy clutched his mother's expensive dress with small, trembling fingers. "Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the restaurant noise. "There are so many people here. I'm scared." Elizabeth didn't slow down. She was heading straight for the VIP section, the private area where people like her always sat, away from everyone else. Separate. Untouchable. But then something happened that would change everything. Elizabeth stopped walking. Her eyes landed on a table in the corner. A simple table, nothing fancy about it. And at that table sat a man and a little girl. The man's name was David Chen. He was 36 years old, with kind eyes and hands that showed years of hard work. His shirt was faded and worn, but clean. You could see the exhaustion on his face, the tiredness that comes from working 2 jobs just to survive. During the day, David delivered packages all over the city. At night, he maintained buildings, fixing broken pipes and faulty heaters. He barely slept. But none of that mattered to him as much as the little girl sitting across from him. Her name was Lily. 7 years old, with bright eyes and a smile that could light up the darkest room. She was giggling as her father carefully cut her pasta into small pieces. The love between them was so pure, so genuine, that it seemed to glow in that fancy restaurant. David had brought Lily here to celebrate. She'd brought home a perfect report card, and even though he could barely afford it, he wanted to make her feel special. They weren't supposed to be in the main dining room at all. A staff member had seated them there by mistake, thinking they'd ordered from the expensive menu. David was too embarrassed to correct them. He just wanted Lily to enjoy the beautiful lights for one night. Young Daniel saw them and froze completely. His eyes went wide. He watched David cutting the pasta with such care, watched Lily's face glowing with happiness, and something stirred inside the boy's heart. Something he'd never felt before. "Mom," Daniel said, pulling on Elizabeth's dress with more force now. "I want to sit with them. With that girl. She looks so happy." Elizabeth frowned. She looked at the humble table, then back at her son. "Daniel, stop staring. We have our own table waiting." But Daniel wouldn't move. "Please, Mom. I want to sit next to them." Now, you have to understand something about Elizabeth Hart. Her entire life was built on control, on strategy, on always knowing exactly what to do next. She ran a billion-dollar company. She made decisions that affected thousands of people. But in that moment, looking at her son's pleading eyes, she felt something shift inside her. Her son was never this insistent. Daniel was usually as quiet and reserved as she was. But now, looking at that happy little girl and her loving father, he was practically begging. And Elizabeth realized something terrible and true. Her money had bought her son silence, but not joy. She'd given him everything except what he really needed. A nervous floor manager rushed over, his face tight with concern. He leaned close to Elizabeth and whispered urgently, "Ma'am, that family. They may not be appropriate for your seating area. Perhaps I could escort you to the VIP room." Elizabeth looked at the manager. Then she looked at her son's hopeful face. Then she looked back at David and Lily, still laughing together in their corner. Her voice came out cold and firm. "My son decides where we sit." And with that, Elizabeth Hart, the woman whose face appeared on the cover of business magazines, whose name made powerful men nervous, walked straight toward that humble corner table. David looked up and nearly choked on his water. His eyes went wide with shock. He found himself face to face with Elizabeth Hart herself, the woman everyone knew, the woman who controlled half the city's economy. Elizabeth didn't waste time with small talk. She spoke directly, almost bluntly. "My son wants to join your table. May we sit with you?" Lily's face lit up like fireworks. "A new friend?" "Yes," she practically shouted. "You can sit right here, miss." David fumbled with his chair, quickly standing to pull one out for Elizabeth. His hands were shaking slightly. He could smell her expensive perfume, could feel the weight of her presence. "Of course," he managed to say. "Please." As Elizabeth sat down, David's mind was racing. Why would she want to sit with us? We don't belong in her world. We're not even supposed to be in this restaurant. But then something beautiful happened. The two children connected instantly. Daniel, who had been so quiet and reserved just minutes ago, suddenly came alive. Lily's infectious laughter, her easy friendliness, her natural warmth, it all broke through the walls that Daniel had built around himself. They started talking about school, about their favorite cartoons, about what superpowers they wished they had. And while the children laughed and played, Elizabeth and David sat in an awkward silence. They were from completely different worlds, different lives, different everything. But they shared one thing, a deep protective love for their children. Elizabeth watched as David gently finished cutting Lily's pasta into perfect little pieces. She watched his hands, strong hands marked with scars and calluses, hands that had clearly worked hard for every single thing they had. And she realized something that made her heart ache. This man, despite having so little money, was giving his daughter something Elizabeth's entire fortune couldn't buy. He was present. He was there. Not through assistants or nannies or expensive childcare. Him. Personally. Then Daniel leaned across the table, watching David's hands with fascination. His voice came out soft and vulnerable. "Sir, could you cut mine too? Please." Elizabeth froze completely. Her son had never ever asked anyone except his nanny to do something like that. But here he was, trusting this complete stranger instantly. Because even at 6 years old, Daniel could recognize genuine kindness when he saw it. And that's when Elizabeth Hart began to realize that maybe, just maybe, her carefully controlled life had been missing something all along. Something you can't buy. Something you can't delegate. Something as simple and profound as a father cutting pasta for a child with love in his heart. Now let me tell you what happened next, because this is where the story gets harder to watch. Other people in the restaurant had started to notice. Whispers began spreading from table to table like wildfire. Can you imagine the sight? Elizabeth Hart, the Ice Queen CEO, sitting at a shabby corner table with a clearly poor black man and 2 children. People couldn't believe their eyes. At a nearby table sat some of Chicago's wealthiest businesspeople. They leaned toward each other, their voices loud enough to be heard. "Is she having some kind of crisis?" One woman said. "Maybe it's a publicity stunt. You know, charity for the cameras." Elizabeth heard every word. She tensed, ready to stand up and leave. This was exactly the kind of gossip she hated. But then Daniel's small hand grabbed her arm. "Mom," he said quietly. "I like him. Mr. David is like a superhero." Lily jumped in immediately, defending her father with fierce pride. "My daddy is a superhero. He can fix anything. Last week he fixed a whole building's heating system in the middle of winter. Everyone was freezing and he saved them." Elizabeth found herself smiling. Actually smiling. When was the last time she'd done that genuinely? The children's innocent defense of David touched something deep inside her heart. Something she'd thought was dead. David, meanwhile, was looking at the menu with growing anxiety. He knew he couldn't afford most of these dishes. He quietly ordered the cheapest item available, hoping no one would notice how much he was stretching his budget just to be here. But Daniel was watching Lily eat with such delight. "Mom," he said cheerfully, "I want the same thing Lily is having." The waiter came over, notepad in hand. But when he looked at David, really looked at him, his expression changed. His eyes traveled over David's worn shirt, his old watch, his dark skin. The waiter's lips curled slightly with contempt. "Can you actually afford that, sir?" the waiter asked, his voice dripping with disdain. "That's one of our premium dishes. We don't run a charity here." The words hung in the air like poison. David's face fell. He lowered his eyes, already used to this kind of treatment. This casual cruelty that reminded him again and again that he didn't belong in places like this. That his hard work, his dedication, his love for his daughter, none of it mattered when people looked at his clothes and his skin and decided he was worthless. But Elizabeth's eyes flashed with cold fury. She cut the waiter off mid-breath. Her voice dropped to a temperature that could freeze fire. "Bring 2 more servings of that dish immediately. And send the entire bill to my corporate account. Now." The waiter's face went pale. He stammered an apology and practically ran toward the kitchen. But the cruelty wasn't over yet. A prominent woman named Mrs. Richardson, sitting at the most expensive table in the restaurant, couldn't contain herself. She spoke loud enough for everyone to hear, making sure her words carried across the room. "Well, well," she said with mock surprise. "I always thought the Hart family dined with the elite. But I suppose we were wrong. Apparently Elizabeth prefers the company of janitors." She paused, letting the insult sink in. "What a spectacle you're making of yourself, Elizabeth. Your reputation will never recover from this slumming." The words hit David like physical blows. He'd heard insults like this his whole life. But somehow, in front of his daughter, in front of this kind woman and her son, it hurt even more. Lily, however, was not going to let anyone talk about her father that way. She stood up on her chair, her small body vibrating with righteous anger. Her braided hair bounced as she turned to face Mrs. Richardson. "My daddy is better than everyone in this stupid restaurant," she shouted, her voice clear and strong. "He helps people. Real people. You're all just mean." And then something incredible happened. Daniel stood up too. He climbed onto his chair and stood right next to Lily, his hand finding hers. "Mr. David is better than all the boring drivers at my house," he declared. "He knows how to smile. He knows how to be nice. You should learn from him." Elizabeth watched her son standing there, holding hands with Lily, both of them forming a protective wall around David. She'd never seen Daniel so animated, so passionate, so alive. In that moment she realized something profound. David, this man everyone else dismissed as just a janitor, was the most honorable person in the entire room. But then everything changed in an instant. Elizabeth's personal assistant burst through the restaurant doors, her phone pressed to her ear, her face pale with panic. She rushed to their table, nearly tripping in her haste. "Miss Hart," she gasped. "Emergency board meeting. Right now. Someone's staging a corporate coup. They have evidence against you. The board is convening to vote on your removal." The entire restaurant went silent. Every eye turned to watch. Elizabeth's face, usually so composed and controlled, went visibly pale. Her hand started trembling. For years, she'd fought to maintain control of her company. She'd sacrificed everything, her time, her relationships, her own happiness, to stay on top. And now someone was trying to take it all away. The pressure, the exhaustion, the constant battle, it all came crashing down on her at once. Her vision started to blur. Her breathing became shallow. She could feel herself starting to collapse. But David saw it happening before anyone else did. His medical training, dormant for years but never forgotten, kicked in instantly. He recognized the signs immediately. Acute stress leading to dangerous low blood sugar. A hypoglycemic crisis. David didn't hesitate. He didn't think about who she was or what people would say. He grabbed a glass of water from the table and a packet of sugar from the coffee service. He shoved them into Elizabeth's trembling hands. "Drink," he commanded, his voice firm but gentle. "Drink it now. All of it." His hands moved with the precision of someone who had made life-or-death decisions 1,000 times before. The restaurant staff whispered in amazement. How did he know what to do? How did he move so fast? Elizabeth drank the sweet water. Her assistant hovered nervously, not knowing what to do. But David stayed calm, talking to Elizabeth in a low, steady voice, keeping her grounded in the present moment. After a few tense minutes, color returned to Elizabeth's cheeks. Her breathing stabilized. She looked up at David with tears in her eyes, tears of shock and gratitude and confusion. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you help me? After the way they treated you, you didn't owe me anything." David's eyes were steady and kind. He glanced at Daniel, who was clutching his mother's arm with terror on his young face. "Because your son needs his mother alive," David said simply. "And no mother, no matter who she is, should collapse in front of her child. That's not about money or status. That's about being human." In that moment, lying back in the expensive booth, surrounded by people who depended on her wealth and power, Elizabeth realized something that broke her heart and healed it at the same time. The only person who had seen her as a human being, the only one who had truly helped her when she was vulnerable, was the man everyone else had dismissed and insulted. He didn't see the CEO. He didn't see the target for a corporate coup. He didn't see the charity case. He just saw a mother in danger. And he saved her. Elizabeth knew she couldn't stay in that restaurant. Not with everyone watching. Not with her world crumbling around her. She quietly ushered David and the children into the restaurant's private VIP lounge, a sanctuary of leather furniture and dark wood paneling, away from the staring eyes and cruel whispers. Daniel and Lily were already playing together, their earlier fear forgotten. They chased each other around the elegant room, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings. It was the sweetest sound Elizabeth had ever heard. She sat down across from David, and for the first time in years, she let her guard completely down. Her shoulders sagged. Her carefully maintained expression cracked. "They're trying to destroy me," she said quietly, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "They're spreading rumors that I'm not mentally or physically fit to run the company. They needed proof of a medical crisis, and I just gave them one. On camera. In front of half of Chicago's elite." David looked at his hands, then back at her. "That's why you had that stress response," he said gently. "It wasn't the food or exhaustion. It was fear. Fear of losing control. You've been running on empty for so long that your body finally gave out." Elizabeth looked up, surprised. "You speak like a doctor. Or a therapist. The way you acted back there. It was instinctual, professional. What's your background, David?" David hesitated. He'd kept this secret for so long, buried it so deep that sometimes he almost forgot it himself. Then Daniel ran over, tugging on David's sleeve. "Tell the story," the boy said excitedly. "The one about when you saved someone from the fire." Elizabeth's curiosity deepened. Saved someone. David let out a long, slow breath. The weight of his past pressed down on him. But looking at Elizabeth's genuine interest, at the trust in the children's eyes, he decided it was time to tell the truth. "I was an emergency trauma doctor," he revealed, the words painful to speak. "Military trained. I specialized in combat field medicine and psychological crisis response. That's why I recognized your symptoms instantly. I've seen that exact condition hundreds of times in soldiers under extreme stress." Elizabeth's eyes widened in shock. "You're a doctor? But why are you working as a delivery driver and a maintenance man?" David's face crumbled with old grief. "Because I couldn't save my wife." The room went quiet. Even the children stopped playing, sensing the shift in mood. "I was deployed overseas," David continued, his voice rough with emotion, "consulting on critical surgeries, saving lives on the battlefield. One night, My wife went into a hospital back home for a procedure. It should have been routine, but complications happened. Her doctor called me for advice mid-surgery. I was thousands of miles away, but I tried to help. I gave them the best guidance I could." He paused, tears forming in his eyes. But it wasn't enough. The procedure failed. She died on that table. And I was too far away to save her. I was so focused on being the best trauma doctor, on saving everyone else, that I created a distance from the person who mattered most. I felt like my career killed her. Like my ambition killed her. Elizabeth reached across the table and gently touched his hand. "So you stopped practicing medicine." "I traded saving the world," David said, his voice breaking, "for securing Lily's small world. I promised myself I would never be too far away from her. Never again. If she needs me, I'll be there in 5 minutes. Not 5,000 miles. That's why I work 2 jobs in the same neighborhood. That's why I gave up everything I'd worked for. Because being a present father is more important than being a brilliant doctor." Elizabeth felt tears running down her own cheeks. She understood now. This man had sacrificed his entire career, his purpose, his identity, because he loved his daughter more than anything else in the world. "I manage billions of dollars," Elizabeth whispered. "But I can't manage my own son's happiness. I've delegated everything. His care, his comfort, his joy. I've bought him everything except my time." "Money creates distance," David said gently. "But love closes it. You just have to choose which one you value more." Then something happened that froze Elizabeth's heart. Daniel, who had been quietly listening, suddenly stopped moving. His face went white. He gripped his chest, his small body rigid with panic. "Mom," he gasped. "I can't breathe." Elizabeth lunged toward him, terror flooding her system. "Daniel, what's wrong?" David, the trauma doctor resurfacing, immediately grabbed the boy's wrist and checked his pulse. "His heart rate is spiking. He's having an acute panic attack. Daniel, can you hear me?" The boy was hyperventilating now, tears streaming down his face. "I'm scared Mom will get hurt. I'm scared she'll disappear. All the nannies say she works too much and one day she won't come back home." Elizabeth tried to hold him, but Daniel recoiled, his little body shaking with fear. She realized with horror that she didn't know how to comfort her own son. She could negotiate billion-dollar deals, but she couldn't calm her child. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her sense of failure absolute. David took immediate action. He scooped Daniel into his arms, holding the terrified boy against his chest. "Hey, buddy," he said in a low, calm voice. "I'm right here. You're safe. Nothing bad is going to happen. Let's breathe together, okay? In through your nose, out through your mouth." He demonstrated the rhythmic breathing pattern he'd used with soldiers in shock. He kept Daniel grounded in the present moment with simple sensory questions. "Can you feel my shirt? What color is it? Can you count how many lights are above us?" Daniel followed David's steady rhythm. Slowly, gradually, his breathing normalized. His rigid body relaxed. He melted against David's chest in complete trust. "You smell like clean laundry," Daniel whispered. "Like home." Elizabeth watched the scene unfold, and her heart shattered into a million pieces. Her son had never shown this level of trust with anyone outside of her. And even with her, he'd never relaxed so completely. She realized that her wealth had robbed Daniel of something fundamental. The simple security of a caring, present father figure. All the expensive toys, all the elite schools, all the nannies and tutors, none of it could replace what David had just given her son in 5 minutes. Then Elizabeth's assistant burst back into the room, her phone practically smoking from so many calls. "Miss Hart," she screamed, "the video of you collapsing is already viral. It's all over social media. The board is meeting right now to invoke the fitness clause in your contract. They're going to strip you of your position tonight." Elizabeth sank into her chair, devastated. "It's over," she whispered. "They're going to use my weakness against me. Everything I've built, gone." But David stood up, still holding Daniel, his voice suddenly firm and decisive. The voice of a man who made critical decisions under fire. Listen to me, Elizabeth. You're not a cold CEO who collapsed. You're a mother who's been fighting so hard to protect her family's legacy that your body finally gave out. That's not weakness. That's sacrifice. Elizabeth looked up at him through her tears. No one has ever said that to me before. Everyone just sees the corporation, the money, the power. David gently set Daniel down and turned to face Elizabeth fully. Let me help you. You don't fight a coup with more power. You fight it with truth. And then this remarkable man, this former military doctor working as a maintenance worker, began to analyze the situation with stunning clarity. The timing of this coup is too perfect, he said, pacing the room. Your assistant conveniently shows up right after your collapse. The video is leaked immediately. The board meeting is called within an hour. This isn't opportunistic. This is coordinated. He pulled out his phone and started making notes. Someone has been planning this for months. They've been waiting for the right moment to strike. Who benefits most from your removal? Elizabeth thought for a moment. Robert Crawford, head of operations. He's always wanted my position. Then Crawford is your target, David said. He hired your assistant specifically to gather evidence. That leak wasn't an accident. It was intentional, designed to create maximum public outrage and force the shareholders to act. Elizabeth stared at him in amazement. You're thinking 10 steps ahead of my entire legal team. How? Because I'm not thinking like a lawyer, David said. I'm thinking like a field strategist. In combat medicine, you learn to read situations instantly. You find the hidden factors, the real threats. And right now, the real threat isn't your collapse. It's the narrative Crawford is building around it. He turned to face her directly. We don't deny the collapse. We reframe it. We turn his weapon into your strength. We call it what it really is, a mother's exhaustion from fighting a hostile takeover designed to destroy her family's legacy. Elizabeth felt hope blooming in her chest for the first time that night. You could be my chief strategist. You see the human factor in all this cold corporate math. David shook his head. I only know one thing for certain. Your son needs you to be strong. So we make you stronger by showing your humanity. Your vulnerability becomes your greatest asset. He looked at both children, who were watching with wide eyes. Kids, we have a mission. We need to save the company so Daniel's mom can keep doing her important work. Can you help us be brave? Both children cheered, their fear transforming into purpose. Daniel ran to David and hugged him tightly. Please don't leave us. I need you to stay with Mom. And Elizabeth, looking at this remarkable man who had appeared in her life like a miracle, knew that everything was about to change. Elizabeth made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She invited David and Lily back to her mansion for dinner. Not as charity, not as a thank you, but because for the first time in years she wanted company. Real company. The mansion was exactly what you'd expect. Massive gates, a winding driveway, marble floors that echoed with every step. It was beautiful and cold and empty, like a museum. Daniel was waiting by the door when they arrived. When he saw Lily, his face lit up like Christmas morning. You came, he shouted, grabbing her hand. Come on. I want to show you my playroom. The two children raced off together, their laughter filling halls that had been silent for far too long. David stood in the enormous foyer, feeling completely out of place. He adjusted his collar nervously. This house, it doesn't belong to someone like me. Elizabeth smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed her entire face. Tonight it does. Please just be yourself. The dinner that followed was nothing like the tense restaurant scene. It was warm, comfortable, real. They sat in Elizabeth's private dining room, a smaller, cozier space than the formal dining hall. Lily entertained them all with stories about her dad's superhero moments. How he once fixed a broken water heater in the middle of winter and saved an entire apartment building from freezing. How he rescued a neighbor's cat that got stuck in a tree. How he always knew exactly what to say when she was sad. Daniel listened to every word, completely captivated. He laughed so hard at Lily's animated storytelling that he nearly fell off his chair. Elizabeth watched David throughout the meal. Really watched him. She saw the way he unconsciously checked on Lily every few minutes, making sure she was happy and comfortable. She saw his strong, scarred hands as he helped in the kitchen, insisting on doing his part. She saw a complete man, capable, caring, brilliant, and humble all at once. Later, after the children had gone to play, Elizabeth and David sat in her library, drinking tea and talking quietly. "How do you manage to be so present?" Elizabeth asked, genuine envy in her voice. "I have entire teams dedicated to my son, yet I miss everything. I delegate his happiness. I delegate his childhood." David smiled sadly. "I don't delegate because I can't afford to. But more importantly, I don't delegate because I learned the hard way that presence is the most precious thing we own. Every time I cut Lily's food or fix one of her toys or read her a bedtime story, I'm creating a memory with her. Those memories are my wealth." He looked directly at Elizabeth. "You have infinite financial capital, but I have infinite time capital with my daughter. The question is, which kind of capital matters more?" Elizabeth walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "For years, I believed I could buy everything Daniel needed. But tonight I realized I've bought him loneliness. You gave him 10 minutes of belonging that my entire fortune couldn't purchase." "Money creates distance," David said gently. "Love closes it. You just have to decide which one you value more." Elizabeth turned to face him. "I spent my entire life building walls of ice to protect myself. I thought if I was cold enough, strong enough, nothing could hurt me. But those walls didn't keep danger out. They kept love out." She paused, her voice breaking with emotion. "Tonight, you didn't just save my company. You saved my heart from freezing completely." The next morning came too fast. Elizabeth stood in her bedroom, staring at her reflection. Today was the emergency shareholders meeting. Today her entire career could end. But for the first time, she wasn't facing it alone. David arrived early, dressed in the best suit he owned. It was old and didn't quite fit right, but he wore it with dignity. Lily and Daniel walked beside them, holding hands, dressed in their best clothes. "Are we really going to the big meeting?" Daniel asked nervously. "Yes," Elizabeth said, kneeling down to his level. "Because you're my foundation. Both of you. I want everyone to see what really matters to me." The shareholders' meeting was held in Hart Industries' largest conference room. The tension was suffocating. 40 board members and major shareholders sat around an enormous table. At the head of the table sat Robert Crawford, smirking with confidence. Crawford was a man who believed power came from ruthlessness alone. He'd spent months planning this coup, planting stories, gathering evidence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now, with the viral video of Elizabeth's collapse playing on every news channel, he thought he'd won. "Ladies and gentlemen," Crawford began, his voice dripping with false concern, "we're here to discuss Miss Hart's fitness to lead this company. As you've all seen, she collapsed publicly due to what appears to be a serious medical condition. We cannot allow someone unstable to control billions of dollars and thousands of jobs." The room murmured in agreement. Elizabeth felt her heart sinking. But then David stood up. He walked calmly to the front of the room and commandeered the presentation screen. His movements were confident and precise. "My name is David Chen," he said, his voice clear and strong. "And I'm going to tell you exactly what happened in that restaurant." He pulled up the viral video and began to break it down frame by frame. Using his analytical skills from his military training, he showed how the video was deliberately filmed by Elizabeth's assistant. He pointed out the camera angles, the timing, the way the assistant had positioned herself perfectly to capture the collapse. "This wasn't an accident," David stated. "This was a planned operation." Then he presented medical evidence, explaining hypoglycemia in simple terms. Miss Hart's collapse was caused by acute stress-induced low blood sugar. It's a temporary condition caused by exhaustion, not an underlying disease. With proper rest and stress management, it's completely reversible. The board members leaned forward, listening intently. But David wasn't finished. He pulled up a second presentation, one he'd spent all night preparing. It showed a pattern of communications between Crawford and the assistant. Text messages, email trails, financial transfers. Mr. Crawford has been planning this coup for 8 months, David revealed. He hired Miss Hart's assistant specifically to gather compromising information. He's been spreading rumors about her mental state to create doubt. And when the opportunity presented itself last night, he made sure it went viral immediately. Crawford's face went bright red. This is outrageous. Who is this maintenance man to make such accusations? I'm not a maintenance man, David said calmly. I'm a former military trauma doctor and medical strategist. And I'm very good at identifying coordinated attacks when I see them. He turned to face the entire board. This isn't about Miss Hart's health. This is about a man who wanted her position so badly that he was willing to exploit a mother's exhaustion, weaponize her humanity, and destroy her reputation to get it. The room erupted in angry whispers. The shareholders were shocked. They turned on Crawford immediately, their faces filled with disgust. Is this true? Demanded the chairman of the board. Crawford sputtered, trying to defend himself, but the evidence was overwhelming. Within minutes, security was escorting him out of the building. His career was over. His reputation destroyed. The chairman turned to Elizabeth. Miss Hart, on behalf of the entire board, I apologize. Your dedication to this company has never been in question. We were manipulated and we're sorry. Then the chairman looked at David with obvious respect. And who exactly are you? Your competence is remarkable. Elizabeth stood up, her voice strong and clear. This is David Chen. He's the man who saved my life. He's the man who uncovered this conspiracy. And as of today, he's my chief strategy and wellness officer. His job is to remind this entire corporation about the human factor we've forgotten in our pursuit of profit. The board, witnessing David's quiet power and brilliant mind, immediately approved the appointment with a unanimous vote. But David held up his hand. I'll accept, but only under certain conditions, he said firmly. My work schedule must allow me to remain a fully present father. Lily is my priority, not a negotiation point. My presence here is a commitment to better work-life balance for every parent in this company. The board members looked at each other, then nodded in agreement. It was time for change. Daniel ran up and hugged David's leg. Please stay forever. We need you here. Elizabeth looked at David, her defenses completely gone. I want you to stay too, as my partner, in every sense of that word. 6 months later, everything had changed. The Hart Mansion, once cold and echoing, was now filled with warmth and life. Children's laughter rang through the halls. Toys were scattered across the floors. The smell of home-cooked meals wafted from the kitchen. It finally felt like a home. David had transformed not just Elizabeth's personal life, but her entire company. He'd implemented new policies. Mandatory parental leave, flexible work schedules, on-site childcare, mental health support. The employees, who had once feared Elizabeth, now respected her more than ever. Productivity actually increased because people were happier, healthier, more balanced. Elizabeth herself was a different person. She still worked hard, still made tough decisions, still commanded respect in every boardroom she entered. But now she also made it home for dinner every night. She read bedtime stories to Daniel. She knew the names of his friends and his favorite subjects in school. One evening, the 4 of them sat together in the garden. It had become their special place, where they gathered at the end of each day to talk and laugh and just be together. Lily and Daniel were playing on the grass, building an elaborate fort out of blankets and garden furniture. Their bond had only grown stronger over the months. They were inseparable like true siblings. Elizabeth sat next to David on the garden bench, her head resting on his shoulder. I've been thinking about something, she said quietly. What's that? David asked, his arm around her. A year ago, I would have told you I had everything. Money, power, success, respect. I thought I was living the perfect life. She paused, watching the children play. But I was so wrong. I had nothing. I was empty inside. Cold. Alone. David kissed the top of her head gently. You weren't empty. You were just buried under all those walls you built to protect yourself. Maybe, Elizabeth said. But you're the one who helped me tear those walls down. You showed me what really matters. She sat up and turned to face him. I want to ask you something important. David smiled. What is it? Elizabeth took a deep breath. I want us to be a real family. Not just two single parents helping each other. Not just business partners. I want to marry you, David. I want Lily and Daniel to really be brother and sister. I want to wake up next to you every morning and know that we're building something beautiful together. David's eyes filled with tears. Happy tears. Are you sure? I don't come with any fortune. I can't add to your empire. I'm just... Elizabeth put her finger on his lips. You're not just anything. You're everything I was missing. You're the man who saved my life. You're the man who taught my son how to laugh. You're the man who reminded me what it means to be human. She smiled through her own tears. I don't need someone to add to my fortune. I need someone to share my life with. And that's you. David pulled her close and kissed her. It was a kiss that held all the hope and promise of their future together. Yes, he whispered against her lips. Yes, I'll marry you. Because you're not the ice queen everyone thinks you are. You're the woman who was brave enough to sit at a humble table with a stranger. You're the woman who defended me when everyone else looked down on me. You're the woman who chose love over reputation. The children, hearing the emotion in their voices, came running over. What's happening? Lily asked, her eyes wide. Elizabeth and David looked at each other, then at the children. How would you two feel, David said gently, if we all became one family? If Lily and Daniel became real brother and sister? Daniel's face exploded with joy. Really? You mean it? Lily jumped up and down, clapping her hands. We get to live together forever? Forever, Elizabeth confirmed, pulling both children into her arms. The four of them sat together on that garden bench, wrapped in each other's arms, as the sun set over Chicago. They were no longer the cold CEO and the struggling single dad. They were no longer separated by wealth or status or society's judgment. They were simply a family. Let me tell you what happened at their wedding 3 months later, because it was unlike any wedding Chicago had ever seen. Elizabeth could have had the most expensive, elaborate ceremony in the city. She could have invited hundreds of powerful people, turned it into a massive social event, made it a spectacle for the magazines and newspapers. But she didn't want any of that. Instead, they held the ceremony in the Hart Mansion's garden, the same place where they'd shared so many quiet evenings together. Only 50 people attended. Close friends, family, and some of the employees from Hart Industries who had become like family over the past months. Lily and Daniel walked down the aisle together, holding hands and carrying flowers. They were the ring bearers, and they took their job very seriously, their faces solemn with concentration. When David saw Elizabeth walking toward him in her simple white dress, his breath caught in his throat. She wasn't wearing millions of dollars in jewelry. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just herself, beautiful and radiant and real. They wrote their own vows. Elizabeth spoke first, her voice steady but emotional. David, you came into my life when I was at my lowest point. You didn't see a CEO or a billionaire. You saw a mother who needed help, and you helped without asking for anything in return. You taught me that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or delegated. You taught me how to be present, how to love without walls, how to be human again. I promise to spend the rest of my life being the partner you deserve, the mother Daniel needs, and the person I was always meant to be. David's voice shook as he spoke. Elizabeth, I spent years believing I didn't deserve happiness. I punished myself for not being able to save my wife. I convinced myself that I was only good for small, simple things. But you showed me that I was wrong. You showed me that my past doesn't define my future. You gave me purpose again. You trusted me when no one else would. You defended me when the world looked down on me. And you loved me despite everything I thought made me unworthy. I promise to stand beside you through every challenge, to remind you of your humanity when the corporate world tries to steal it, and to love you and Daniel with everything I have. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. When they kissed, Lily and Daniel cheered so loudly that everyone laughed through their tears. The years that followed were not always easy. Elizabeth still faced challenges at work. There were still people who judged her relationship with David, who whispered that she'd married down, who couldn't understand why someone so wealthy would choose someone so ordinary. But Elizabeth had learned to ignore those voices. She'd learned that true wealth isn't measured in money but in moments. In laughter around the dinner table. In bedtime stories and scraped knees and school plays. In quiet conversations in the garden after the children were asleep. In the feeling of David's hand in hers as they faced each challenge together. David continued his work at Hart Industries, transforming the company culture from the inside. He created programs that supported working parents, that prioritized mental health, that reminded everyone that business success means nothing if it costs you your humanity. His most popular initiative was called the Present Parent Program. It encouraged executives and employees at all levels to be fully present with their children, to prioritize family moments over unnecessary meetings, to understand that being a good parent makes you a better employee, not a worse one. The program became so successful that other companies started copying it. David was invited to speak at conferences across the country. He became known not as Elizabeth Hart's husband, but as a revolutionary thinker in workplace culture and family wellness. But despite all his professional success, David's greatest pride was always watching Lily and Daniel grow up together. Daniel, once so quiet and reserved, became confident and outgoing. He excelled in school and sports, but more importantly, he was kind. He stood up for kids who were bullied. He helped his classmates who struggled. He'd learned from David that true strength comes from compassion. Lily remained her bright, joyful self, but she also developed her father's analytical mind and her stepmother's business sense. She talked about becoming a doctor like her dad, or maybe running a company like her mom. Elizabeth and David always told her the same thing. Be whatever makes you happy. We'll support you no matter what. 10 years after that first meeting in the restaurant, Elizabeth stood at a podium giving the keynote speech at a business conference. But this time, her speech wasn't about corporate strategy or quarterly profits. I'm often asked, she told the audience, what the secret to success is. And for most of my life, I would have told you it was hard work, strategy, determination, and never showing weakness. She paused, looking out at the hundreds of faces watching her. But I was wrong. Those things might build a company, but they don't build a life. The real secret to success is knowing what truly matters. It's having the courage to choose people over profit, love over status, presence over power. She smiled, her eyes finding David and the children sitting in the front row. 10 years ago, I almost lost everything because I'd forgotten how to be human. I'd built walls so high that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. That my son needed a mother, not a CEO. That success means nothing if you're alone at the top. That the richest life is one filled with love, not money. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. A man I'd never met saved my life, not just physically but in every way that matters. He didn't do it for money or recognition or advancement. He did it because he saw a mother in danger and a child who needed her. That simple act of humanity changed everything. She looked directly at David. That man is now my husband. And together we've built something more valuable than any corporation. A family. A real, messy, beautiful family where love matters more than stock prices and dinner together is more important than board meetings. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. So here's my message to all of you, Elizabeth concluded. Success without humanity is worthless. Power without compassion is empty. Wealth without love is poverty. Don't wait until you're collapsing in a restaurant to realize what really matters. Choose it now. Choose presence. Choose connection. Choose love. The room erupted in applause. But Elizabeth wasn't paying attention to them anymore. She stepped down from the podium and walked straight to her family. Daniel and Lily jumped up to hug her. David wrapped his arms around all three of them. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," Daniel whispered. "You told them the truth," Lily added. David just kissed her forehead and held her close. That evening, they went back to the garden. Their special place. The place where everything had changed. The children were older now, teenagers with their own lives and dreams and challenges. But they still made time for these family evenings, still cherished these moments of connection. Elizabeth sat between David and the children, looking up at the stars emerging in the darkening sky. "Do you ever think about that night in the restaurant?" she asked David quietly. "Every day," he replied. "It was the night my life began again." "Mine too," Elizabeth said. She turned to look at her family, her real wealth, and smiled. Lily leaned her head on Elizabeth's shoulder. "Tell us the story again. About how you and Dad met." Daniel grinned. "Yeah, the one where Mom was being all scary and CEO-like, and Dad was being all superhero-like." Elizabeth laughed, that genuine, joyful laugh that had taken her so long to rediscover. "All right. It all started in a fancy restaurant called the Golden Peacock." And as she told the story, their story, of judgment and compassion, of crisis and courage, of two broken people who found healing in each other, the Chicago night wrapped around them like a warm blanket. They were no longer the ice queen and the janitor. They were no longer separated by wealth or status or society's cruel judgments. They were simply a family, bound together by the strongest force in the universe. Love that sees beyond the surface, that values presence over presence, that understands that the richest life is one shared with people who matter. And in that garden, under those stars, surrounded by the laughter and love of her family, Elizabeth Hart finally understood what true wealth really meant. If stories like this remind you of what really matters in life, take a moment to reflect on your own relationships. Are you choosing presence or just presents? Are you building walls or building connections? Because in the end, the only thing that truly matters is love. Thank you for listening to this story. May it inspire you to see the humanity in everyone you meet, and to never let status or wealth blind you to what's truly valuable in this life.